You know, we've seen it all before. You know, we've all got an area of land nearby where perhaps this plan's been put in and there's maybe the odd notice put on a lamppost nearby. It may even be a for sale sign up. And what happens is there's an architect who's done some drawings, plans have gone in, everything's been agreed and drawn up. And then the builders turn up and they begin to work, and the site is cleared and they sweep it clear. Some materials may turn up and they'll begin to dig. And you can see the outline of the structure that's going to be built. The concrete's poured. And then the work grinds to a halt. And it's really peculiar. It's almost like the builder has run out of steam or he's run out of money. And it's left for a while. Nobody turns up, and a week goes by, then a month. And then before you know it, 10 months or a year, and nothing happens. And weeds have begun to grow on the foundations, and what has already been built is spoilt, and still nothing happens. And rubbish accumulates, people begin fly tipping. And this is where Haggai kicks off. The book of Haggai begins at the second building of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, 88 years earlier, God's people had been taken into exile by the Babylonians. And what happened is the old temple that was built by Solomon, where God's glory radiated from the temple, was destroyed. And God's people were taken into exile by Nebuchadnezzar. And they were resettled. And then we have the book of Daniel and the book of Ezekiel. But then, after 70 years, King Cyrus had allowed them home. And the remnant, those who chose to return, to rebuild, to leave the comfort that they had, began the long journey back to the promised land. And very shortly after that, work began on the temple, the clearing of the site, the drawing of plans, the capturing of all the bricks and the old materials that had been scattered here and there were brought back to the site, and the site was cleared. And there'd been an excitement, but the work stopped. The oldest among them could remember Solomon's temple, the previous one, in all its splendour, with the gold trappings and the incense and the sacrifices and the pomp and ceremony. And here they were, a ragtag band, trying to rebuild the temple with materials that weren't as grand. And they wept when they saw the foundations, and they were discouraged. Sometimes in our walk with God, we can become like these people. We can begin an adventure that we know God is in with us. And there's excitement. And there's really, really furious action takes place. And everything's going the right way. And then we kind of stumble, and there's something not quite right. Something goes wrong. And then adventure turns into something that is not how we imagined it. And we find opposition. For the Israelites, it may have been a couple of years of bad harvest or opposition from the nations around who didn't want to see the temple being rebuilt. And they were discouraged, and we can become discouraged and almost defeated, even though God is on our side. We take our eyes off him, and like Peter climbing out of that boat took his eyes off Jesus, we can fall. And this is what happened to God's people back in Jerusalem. They stopped building. And a month goes past, and then a year goes past, and then we're 10 and eventually 18 years down the line, and they're waiting for a good harvest. In that time, they manage to build their houses, and they begin to rebuild the city. But the temple remains in ruins. And God sends Haggai to get them going again. He sends Haggai, and Haggai is a prophet who asks questions. That's what he does. That's his modus operandi. That's how he functions as a prophet. And he looks at the temple, and he looks at the way in which the people of Israel, the Judeans, they're feathering their own nests. And he asks a very poignant question, and it's a question that we quite often should pose to ourselves today. He says, is it right that we live in our panelled houses while the house of the Lord is in ruins. And the truth for Jerusalem at that time is that the citizens of Jerusalem, God's people, were living in really, really nice, well-furnished houses that were in a really good condition and looking really nice and really grand. But looking across, they could see that the temple, the foundations were built and the materials were there, but it was overgrown and there was weeds and no work had taken place on it. And our lives can sometimes be like that. We can be drowned out. We can spend our time taking the kids to football practice. We can spend our time, in some cases, watching the telly. I remember as a student at times needing to revise for my GCSEs, although it is quite a while ago now. And I can remember I'd rather sit and watch Gardener's World or Dad's Army than get stuck in with my homework and get stuck in with my revision, because it was just any old distraction. And sometimes we can be like that. Rather than picking the Word of God up, rather than spending time in prayer, we can put it off. And you know, the one thing about the way the devil is with us, he likes us to either live in the past or in the future. He hates us to be thinking about the present. In the past, we can either be being enthusiastic about things that have happened in the past that we wish we could recapture, like the children of Israel at this point, who are looking back at Solomon's temple, knowing that the new one they're going to build is not going to be as grand. Or we can look at the past and we can blame things that have gone wrong, like the bad harvests that the people of Jerusalem may have had, like the opposition, and they can blame things for not having got things right and not having built that temple, not having built our relationship with God. Blame other things. The devil also likes us to keep us in the future. You know, God's got something for us, and when we get into it, that's when we will really put our feet on the ground and rubber will hit the road. But the truth is, it's only in this moment, it's only in the now that we can experience God. But no point trying to experience God tomorrow, because tomorrow may never come, or if it comes, it won't be what we're expecting, or something else will come in the way. There's no point living in yesterday, because yesterday's gone. It's only in the now that we can experience God. And when we look at this situation in Haggai, what do we put before God? What do we put before God? It might not be EastEnders, for example, but if we spend more time a week watching EastEnders than reading the Word of God, what do we actually expect is going to have more of an impact on us? Now, we're all locked up. We're all locked down. Most of us are. A lot of us are. Those people that are working from home, maybe putting the same workly week in, but that half an hour journey to and from work that we're not normally having, that we're now at home, we've got more time than we had before. What are we filling that time with? And I'm reminded of somebody once telling me of an illustration where they were in front of a classroom full of children and a large clear jug, and that jug being filled with big stones to the brim. At which point the teacher said to the children, is this jug full? And the children said, yeah, it's full. And then out came the smaller pebbles, the pebbles that are probably the size of a 50p piece, and they were poured in and there was space for them. And the question was asked, is this full? And some of the children said yes, and some of the children said no. And then out came the marbles, and the marbles were poured in. And the same question is asked. And then comes the sand, and then comes the water. And as a people, the illustration is that with our lives, it's important that the big things, the important things, that we put them first and we have them as an anchor. It might be the half an hour of the day that we wake up to, where we give God time first in our prayers. It might be the last thing at night, but those things that we view as most important, we schedule in. Now, if we're serving a God, and that God is a God who deserves our best, he deserves our first, why would we not be like that with our time? If we give him our lives, can he not expect an hour or two of our time, or even half an hour of our time, where we get with him and have relationship and communion with him? Because he just wants to know us. He just wants to know us. So while we're in lockdown, I just challenge you. Where's your priorities? Is your house and your life built out of beautiful panels, and the space that you've left for God is barren? And if it is, before we all go back to work, before everything goes back to normal, use this time of flux to set habits in place that will last you for the rest of your life. And put God first. Seek him. Ask what he wants of you in this new changed world we're about to enter into. And make sure we're serving him as we ought. Enjoy.